few years, Paul has represented our Library Services Centre to public libraries throughout the country. So this session is designed to provide a quick look at a necessarily small selection of titles that for the most part are not the biggest sellers that every library is usually aware of and buys, but are among all the others available in the coming months and can be easily overlooked unless specifically noted. I'd like to hand over the presentation now to Paul Lockwood. Welcome.
Thank you, and welcome to everybody who's listening to me. This is kind of strange for me. I'm used to speaking to people face to face, so I'm imagining you all sitting around the conference table here instead of just empty chairs. But you're a lovely looking crowd, I must say. So what I'm going to do is for any of you, and this will only take about a minute, just if you don't know or haven't heard of the Library Services Centre, we are a wholesaler like a number of other wholesalers that operate in Ontario and in Western Canada. We're probably one of the largest wholesalers of bibliographic material to libraries. We'd probably rank in the top 3 or 4, and in terms of public library suppliers, we'd be either number 1 or number 2. We don't all release our sales figures, so we're not sure. But in last fiscal year, we supplied about 1 million items to libraries, and we deal with over 8,000 suppliers. We maintain a database of about 1.8 million titles, and we add about 70,000 new ones a year. We also offer processing, and we processed about 900,000 of those just over 1 million items. We have one of the largest cataloging departments in Canada. We catalog about 70,000 titles a year. Thus ended the commercial. Now, why have I titled it Hidden Gems?
Has joined the conference.
I titled it Hidden Gems because these books are, for the most part, not what you would consider main bestsellers. They're not John Grisham, Janet Evanovich, who does have a new one coming, by the way, and people like that, because libraries, patrons, they're well aware of those. The selectors in the libraries know the authors, know the companies, they're looking for them, they're aware of them, they usually get them if they're popular in the library, and they probably are in just about all libraries. So what I'm looking at and what I focus this on is things that are below that level. I'm not sure I'd actually say mid-list, but it might sort of be in that kind of level. But there are things that for some particular reason might just stand out a little bit more from the crowd of the gazillions of books published in North America in English every year. The reason I've titled it Semi-Personal is that although I did select them, most of it was on the recommendation from a number of people who I will publicly thank here. Megan Renkema in our here at LSC in our Selection Services Department, and some of the reps that I know well and have known for a long time and trust their choices very much, which is not to say other people I don't, but these are the ones that were very close to me recently and I've talked to and sent me information. Blaring Tribe at Random House, Lorene Cusack at Thomas Allen, Ann Ledden, one of my former bosses in a previous job at MacArthur and Company, and Margot Stockgreave, who's an independent rep and represents a number of small publishers. They also usually tell me why they particularly chose some of these titles, and I can pass that on to you. I'm not going to pretend that this is a definitive selection. It's not. It's about 30 titles, which I think I can get through in the time and leave a little bit at the end. So it's really a small selection. I mean, you could do this for 3 or 4 hours if you wanted to, or longer. I don't know if some of you have heard of a group called the Dewey Divas. They do day-long presentations among 7 or 8 of them for libraries in southern Ontario and southwestern Ontario on just this type of book. The things you might overlook, they're just a bunch of books in a list and they don't stand out, and I'm hoping I can show you why. So I'm going to, if I do it right, bring up the first slide. This is the information that I provided on the slides. The information I'm giving you is not on them, so you'll have to kind of write notes if you want to. You can either write down the title, or if you look down in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a number. I've numbered each one. You can just write down the number and eventually relate it back to the title. I have not put the binding unless it isn't a hardcover book. Then I have put the binding. So if you don't, here for this one, you don't see a binding, it's a hardcover. That just was the easiest and quickest way for me to do it. Without further ado, as they say, wouldn't be any Anyway, the first book, An Exclusive Love. This book is out. It was a January publication. I actually heard the author interviewed a while ago on CBC. Unfortunately, I was in and out of the car. I didn't hear it all. It's non-fiction. And basically, her grandparents committed suicide. And this was something the family did not talk about. And about 16 years after their death, she decided to investigate it and look up their life. They were Hungarian Jews. They survived the Holocaust. They became communists. And during the uprising in Budapest in 1956, they fled the country and they started a new life in Denmark. And then suddenly, a number of years later, they committed suicide. So she looked into it, and she's written about what she investigated, what she found out, and how it affected and related to her personally. It's very elegantly written, very moving, and I suspect you may hear more interviews with her. She's an excellent interviewer. This is also a Dewey pick. This means that those Dewey Divas, this is one of the books they talk about for a particular reason. A lot of book reps at companies, they get advanced copies or they get raw manuscript, sometimes unedited, and they read that, and that's where a lot of these recommendations come from books that aren't out yet. Oh, I've remembered it. Deadly Choices. This one's an interesting one. It's a February publication, but it is, I believe, out and available now. This received a starred review in Publishers Weekly and a starred review in Booklist. Basically, the author, he's done other books in the past as well, and he's a vaccinologist at the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, and he's a world-renowned expert in infectious diseases. And basically, he tackles the claims that childhood inoculations cause brain damage and autism and diabetes and cancer and pimples and who knows what else has been blamed on them. He basically says that there's a lot of misinformation, faulty research, deception, fed by the media, personal injury lawyers and things like that. He's very hard-hitting, but he relies on the science of everything that he's looking into. And basically, he also warns that we are probably going to see eventually quite a resurgence in deadly childhood diseases because a lot of people are hearing the scare, what he considers to be scaremongering, and they don't get vaccinations. So that's an interesting one for people who are keen on that kind of a topic. And yes, he does go after Jenny McCarthy and some of those celebrities that have been anti-vaccination. Fighter. This is a Canadian title. It's coming out from Wiley. It is the unauthorized biography of George St. Pierre, and even though I don't follow this stuff, I know who he is. He was elected Fighter of the Year by Sports Illustrated in 2009. He has 1 million fans on Facebook, and I just saw him interviewed about 2 nights ago on one of the sports channels. Ontario is one of the largest markets for the mixed martial arts and the Ultimate Fighting Club, so it's very popular among some people. George is Canadian. He's fluently bilingual. He comes from a very difficult background. He's had some personal tragedies in his life. He's never been involved with drugs and crime, so he's an interesting role model for some people. And the book is going to detail his life and how his talent and the hard work and perseverance have paid off very handsomely for me. He's very well rewarded. He's signed a big endorsement deal with Gatorade and a few other things which will help his bank accounts very much. He's considered pound for pound the best fighter in the UFC. He also has a foundation, and he uses the resources in his foundation for charitable causes with special emphasis on efforts to impact the lives of at-risk youth. So that's one I think fans of that fighting, shall we call it, would be interested in. This book, I just love the title, How Bad Are Bananas? This is from a very well-respected scientist and writer from the UK. He's associated, he has a consulting company associated with Lancaster University. And it's about how you can figure out the carbon footprint of many things. So that if you're one of those people, that we hope there's a lot of them, that want to make carbon-savvy purchases and informed lifestyle choices, you can use this book to help you. There's a lot of surprises in it. Now, I have not seen this book. It's not out yet. But I'm intrigued when the rep told me that in his list of items, a plastic bag has the smallest carbon footprint of any items in his list, and a block of cheese is really bad. I don't know. I like cheese. Stay away from plastic bags. Maybe this will change my mind. I don't know. The next one A Day in the Life of a Smiling Woman I mention because there are a lot of Margaret Drabble fans. This could go unnoticed. This is the only book which is a complete collection of all her short stories. There is an introduction by the Spanish academic, Jose Fernandez, and he places the stories in the book in the context of Drabble's life and her novel. So a nice short story collection there. Blood, Bones, and Butter. I just like that one too. This is a book for those people, and they're very popular right now, that are fans of the culinary memoirs. The author talks about, the family home and all the entertaining and the big parties that went on, and then how she learned more about cooking in France and Greece and Turkey. She now has her own restaurant in New York, which is called Prune. Now, I don't know about you, but I thought that was kind of a strange name for a restaurant. Prune. Let's go to Prune tonight. Anyway, Anthony Bourdain has endorsed this book, and he will be quoted on the cover as saying it is simply the best memoir by a chef ever. So that may make it stand out a little bit from some of the other ones. The next one I really don't have a lot to say about. It's pretty simple and straightforward. There's a lot of cookbooks come out, but here's a Canadian one that can be supported. It's from the Canadian Living Test Kitchen, and I actually have used their website and some recipes because it has this neat feature where if they did the recipe for 12 people and you've only got 6, you can click 6 in a box and it adjusts the recipe, although it does warn you that the recipe was tested for the 12th person side. It's quite neat. So that's one of the cookbooks that might be of interest, and again, it could be missed. The next book, Drawing Conclusions. This is by Donna Leon. Donna Leon is recognized as one of the top literary crime fiction writers in the world. Her novels are set, this is her 20th book with this character. It's set in Venice. So obviously she's done 20, they're very popular. And basically you get a window into the private Venice of the citizens. There's a lot of beauty, of course, in Venice. There's also a lot of crime, corruption, and she goes through the whole area. Margot Stockcreek recommended this one to me, and Margot said it's probably her favorite mystery writer, and Margot reads a lot, so it's her favorite writer. That is really quite a high recommendation. This is her new hardcover, $26.95 Canadian list. If there's some interest in it, obviously her backlist would probably be available in paper, and would be a much cheaper way to bring some titles in. People that like that. Letters to My Daughter. This is quite fascinating. This is a memoir of survival and courage from Afghanistan's most popular politician. I heard her interviewed as well on the CBC. Can you tell I listen to the CBC a lot? It's really her life story. When her mother was illiterate, when she was 10, her mother sent her to school. And she became determined to become the only one in the family to get an education, which she did. Then the Taliban arrived, took over Afghanistan, which ended her freedom. She was most upset by that, and she discovered the world of politics. And basically what the book is each chapter opens as a letter to her 2 daughters. She passes on her wisdom about justice and dignity. She, of course, does not know how long she will be around because it's a very dangerous place for a woman politician in Afghanistan. But you do get a fresh take on Afghan society and Islam, and a sense of what it's like to live under those conditions over there. She is a current member of Parliament, and she's announced that she wants to run for the presidency in 2014. 100 Names for Love. I also heard this person interviewed just a few days ago on, I'm not sure what program, it was on the CBC, I don't remember the program. She'd previously done a book called The Zookeeper's Wife. This is a memoir. Her husband was quite a wordsmith and a very gifted intellectual, and he suffered a terrible stroke. He ended up with aphasia, which is loss of language. All the conventional therapies were tried, they did not work, and she decided that with her knowledge of language and the brain, that she could help him in their great connection with each other. And so she did. She set out to do it, and she was able to bring him back, that he is able to use language. Very close to the level that he used to have. It's really a very, very moving story. And as we know, stroke is a major problem in today's society. This one I put in just because it's really interesting.
Has left the conference.
I've I've never seen anything like it. It's the Complete Gay and Lesbian Manners book. I didn't even know there was such a thing. There's a lot of wisdom and wit and practical insight into it, and throughout the book there's questions about, and he provides answers. Things like, what do mothers of two brides wear to a lesbian wedding? Questions. And what do you say to an anti-gay joke? And things like that. The author writes for the Huffington Post, and very well known in the U.S. on matters of LGBT men. Good as Gold. This is a mystery. And the author has written it in a historical context of someone who's on the Titanic, gets off the Titanic, is rumored to have had gold, did it go down with a ship, did it not go down with a ship, what happened? But the interesting thing about this is the author is the granddaughter of Titanic's second officer, who did survive the sinking. And he had an interesting theory about why the Titanic sunk. He did not talk about it till he was on his deathbed. He did not want to embarrass any further the White Star Line after that horrible tragedy. He said that it came out around the time that they moved from steam to sail, and that turning the rudder was exactly the opposite to get the same effect from sail to steam, and that when the iceberg was spotted, somebody instinctively turned the rudder as if it was sail, realized their mistake, and by the time they turned it back, it was too late. Don't know how, whether that really is true, but that was his theory. So she uses this reality in terms of her fiction, and she goes from the thinking of the Titanic right up until modern time. Exposure, interesting novel. This is very much in the tradition of Jodi Picoult, if you know some of her work. This one was picked by the reps because it's a very hot topic. Although the main initial protagonists are high school seniors, the boy sends some naked pictures of himself to his girlfriend. The girlfriend's father sees it, and of course, you know what, breaks loose. But that's that whole hot issue right now that's in the news of sexting. And it is fiction, it is a novel, but it's a hot topic right now. There's a headline seeking DA and that sort of thing. So it's right up to date with current things. And that might make it a little bit different than some other things. This is a fascinating book. The Reading Promise. This is the story of a young woman whose single father, he was an elementary school librarian, he read aloud to her every night, starting when she was in grade 4, until she left for college. And basically, she started when she was in grade 4. They did it for 100 consecutive nights. They enjoyed it so much, the time together in the evening, that they kept it up. And he kept it up literally until she left for college. She's writing it in terms of a series of vignettes about her relationship with her father, the life lessons that are learned. Some of the books she read are, of course, the classic Great Expectations, the Oz books. She also read Harry Potter, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Shakespeare plays. She has had a tremendous amount of interest since the story ran in the New York Times about it, from a lot of the U.S. talk shows, Good Morning America and CBS News and that. She's put them off until around when the book comes out, so there'll probably be a lot of U.S. publicity. It will get picked up in the newspapers here. Her father is writing the foreword to the book. The book is even more awesome. This is just a cute, fun little thing. I always like to throw some of these in. It's a follow-up to the Book of Awesome, and he just talks about some of the little things that help, we smile about every day. Things like driving around with the windows down on late summer nights, and one I particularly liked is fully justifying whatever terrible thing you're eating, because after all, carrot cake starts with the word carrot. I've actually used that. Carrot cake is a vegetable in my world, and if you saw me, you'd know why. Believe me. I tell people I look like Tom Cruise if he really, really, really let himself go. The Nature Principle. This is a follow-up. The author had a best-selling book called Last Child in the Woods. Basically, it's a case for the fact that we need to find a balance between nature and technology in our lives. He asserts that society has developed an outsized faith in technology, like we're using now, and that we have yet to fully realize or even adequately study how human capacities are enhanced through the power of the natural world. He presents a very compelling case that a conscious reconnection to nature can make us whole again, and that in the future, the things are going to be really successful are people who are nature smart, individuals, families, businesses, and communities. It's about the power of living in nature, not with it, but actually in it, getting out into it and being involved with it. It will get a lot of play. I've already seen a review in the New York Times book review that comes as a little section, part of it, with the Sunday Toronto Star. It is, that would be an advanced manuscript that they would have reviewed from. Sojourn, this is another recommendation from Margot Stockley. It comes from a little company called Bellevue Literary Press in the U.S. They only publish about 2 books a year, 1 or 2 books a year. Last year, one of their 2 books, Tinkers, won a Pulitzer Prize. So they're very picky about what they publish. And they're putting this one out this year. The story of 2 Hungarian snipers in World War I hiking through the Alps. Sounds weird, but it's just wonderful, wonderful writing. Margot has ribbed the end. And basically, a tragedy happens in a 19th century mining town in Colorado. The main character goes back to being an impoverished shepherd in rural Austria-Hungary, where the family is originally from. First World War comes out, he becomes a sharpshooter on the southern front, has to survive the trenches, trek across the Alps, captured by the enemy. Sort of a classic fiction set in World War I. But it just because it comes from a company that really is very careful what they do, it's probably quite spectacular and will get reviewed. Father of the Rain. This has been out before in hardcover. It's now coming in paperback, which makes it a lot easier to buy in terms of your budget. In hardcover, when it came out, it was a Globe and Mail Top 100, and it was the Toronto Public Library Best Book in their Best Book list. It was highly recommended for book clubs, and basically it's the story of an alcoholic father and the caring daughter who has written the book. It's set, they were an upper middle class family in an East Coast suburb in the U.S. And she basically talks about the complex and rather volatile relationship between the 2 of them from the 1970s right up until present day. End of the Wasp season. I like the title of this one too. This is another one of these interesting little mysteries that kind of bubbles up from the mid-list. It actually starts with a banker in the UK hanging himself, which I think a lot of people in the UK would like to see happen after the meltdown. And it is set after the meltdown. In this case, it's actually after that, all the economic things have happened. Now, I particularly pointed out because the author did a previous book in 2005 called Field of Blood, and this BBC has bought rights and is going to turn it into a series. Doesn't mean it will play in North America, but there's always a good possibility. That, of course, will also significantly increase her profile in the marketplace. A lot more people will be looking for her. The other interesting I find about it is the chief person who has to solve the crimes, his other related crimes, is Detective Sergeant Alex Morrow. Alex is a woman who is very pregnant with twins as the book opens. That's kind of an interesting difference. The Forgotten Waltz. Anne Enright, you may recognize the author's name. Her last novel won the Booker. Book title, The Gathering. So there will be some interest. Some might claim this is a bestseller. Not guaranteed. Just because you won the Booker the last time doesn't mean your next book will be a bestseller. So I've simply pointed out. McClellan Stewart is publishing her here in Canada. And it is set in Dublin in the recent boom years and continues right up into the current economic woes, the current recession. And basically it's about a multi-year adulterous affair and its effects on all the people that are involved. But the fact that she did win the Booker indicates it's probably going to be pretty good and will get a lot of attention. Sisterhood Everlasting. This is another one that could be considered maybe a bestseller, maybe not. It's hard to say. You may recognize the author's name. She is the author of the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants series. Those books were essentially, technically, aimed at young adults. We don't have to feel sorry for her. They've sold about 8 million copies. This is the same characters, but now they are in their 20s. And so she has aimed this book at an adult audience. One assumes her fame will ensure that it sells very well, but it's just something I wanted to point out. It's not done for that same level of audience as the original. wonder how much, 8 billion copies. Gee. However, we must remember that there's probably 8 million authors who sold one copy of their book that makes up for it. Claire DeWitt and the City of the Dead. This is just another one of those little mysteries among many thousands of mysteries that are published. But I kind of like it. The rep pointed it out to me. It's a new series from this author. It's a new mystery series. It's a female character. The author lived in New Orleans around the time of Katrina, so she had set the novel in post-Katrina New Orleans. The other reason it may get some extra attention and review attention, which could bring it to your patrons' attention, is the fact that Sue Grafton has given it a very, very positive endorsement, and you can pretty well figure out that that's going to end up on the cover of the book. And there's a lot of Sue Grafton fans out there who will take her recommendation. Another interesting little mystery that I think stands out from the others is Inquisition. This novel is set in 14th century Italy. And the main character, Mondino, is a university anatomist back in the time of the Inquisition. So science versus the Inquisition in a sense. It's actually set 1311 in Bologna. The translation, don't shy away from English translations. They're great books. In the original Italian, when it was published, it won a lot of awards in Italy, both commercial and literary awards. It is the first of what will be a series of 3 starring this character. And you can kind of think of it a little bit as a kind of a 14th century CSI. Another one that might interest some of your patrons, The Survivor by Paul Almond. I believe he is Canadian, so I've called it Canadian. There's a lot of discussion about what is or isn't a Canadian book. Some awards, like the Tree Awards, as long as it's authored by either a Canadian citizen or a landed immigrant and published in Canada, it's Canadian. Some people say if it's published in Canada but it's a foreign author, it's Canadian. Some people say it has to be all. There's no standard definition, though, but I believe he is Canadian. This is the second in what will be a series of 5 books. They're kind of Canadian history and thrillers, but the really interesting thing about this is he researched his family tree, and he has gone well back in Canadian history, and he has put his ancestors in the books. Now, it is fiction, but everything historical that he talks about is true, because he's researched it thoroughly. So you have both fact and then fiction of the conversations, etc. And so when he said they went to a battle or something broke out or something burned down in this town in this year, it's true. It did actually happen. So people who say Canadian history is boring, this would be a great series that they could get started on, particularly if they also like mysteries and thrillers. Now, The Hypnotist. This is a translation of a Swedish thriller. Swedish thrillers are hot, hot, hot right now. Henning Mankell is not the only one who can write one, and a good one. The interesting thing as well is Lars Kepler is a pseudonym for a literary couple who write together. And they live in Sweden. It's not only been a bestseller in Sweden, they have sold rights in 33 countries. That tells you that there's really something here. Very, very popular. It is a psychological and quite dark thriller. Whereas, a lot of Henning Mankell stuff, not that dark, but this is quite dark. So I can warn you about that now, but it's very popular. The next one is one I was very, very interested in. Danny's Story. There is about a 75,000 copy first print run. I don't generally announce a lot of print runs because having been in publishing, I know what a game that can be. But this, again, is a true story. The family was featured on Oprah in March of 2009. Basically, in 2005, when Danielle is her full name, was 6 years old, she was removed from her home in Florida. The authorities found her living in bug-ridden squalor, terrible neglect, so damaged that they didn't even know if she could recover, psychologically damaged. She was adopted by a family that had 5 boys already. She had severe learning difficulties they had to work on. Coming with her, she, of course, constantly craved attention because she hadn't really had any. She thought she had to steal food to survive. They had to work with her on that, etc. and so forth. It's a very moving story. It's a very uplifting story. I think it's a good story for our times. As well, now that the couple who adopted her and have worked with her and helped her so much is putting out their story in book form, Oprah has contacted them again, and she would like to have them on again. So they're hoping to do something around the time of the publication of the book, and we all know how influential Oprah's program is. When the story first broke, it was done as an article in the St. Petersburg Times newspaper, and the article won a Pulitzer. So that gives you a sense of where the background of this is coming from. Oh, our alarm just went off outside the door. I think it's one that a lot of people might miss, but I think it's going to get a tremendous amount of publicity. The Good Muslim. I'm talking fast on the head of the schedule. Anyway, this is an interesting book. This is book 2. The first book from this author won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best First Book, and it was a finalist for the Guardian's First Book Award. It was a finalist for the Costa First Book Award. The Costa Award used to be known as the Whitbread Award. What was that name? This is her second book. It's set in Bangladesh, kind of an interesting read for people who want to read about things that don't always happen in North America. And basically it's the story of a family, and it's set against the backdrop of all the military coups and assassinations and the rise of the Islamic right in contemporary Bangladesh. It's seen through the lens of two siblings, one of whom is very religious and the other one who is secular. You can read it as a standalone novel, but you could also go back and read the first one and then read this one as a follow-up, and she will have a third novel titled Salt of Miri. It's not a huge print run they're doing, but it will be published simultaneously by HarperCollins in the U.S. as well as HarperCollins here in Canada. Wicked Bugs. I just like this one. In fact, I asked Loretta if she could slip me a complimentary copy when it comes out. It's basically a darkly comical look at the sinister side of our relationship with the natural world. She looks at over 100 of our worst entomological foes. I have a science background, so I love this. It's creatures that infect, and generally wreak havoc on humans. There's the world's most painful hornet, of course the type of flies that transmit deadly diseases, millipedes, which I guess are so large they can stop traffic. We don't run across any of those. Bookworms, which devour libraries. We're going to want to read about those. And even up includes like the Japanese beetles that munch on your roses. And I wonder if the lily beetles that munch on my lilies might be included too. She had done a previous book called Wicked Plant, which became a bestseller as well and got a lot of reviews. Now she's followed up with the same thing, talking about others. Next book, The Digital Diet. This is an interesting one. Myself as a Luddite, I find these kinds of books interesting. And I have a cell phone that doesn't even take pictures. In fact, it's so old people laugh when I pull it out. But basically what he's saying is that we all, or most of us, need to go on a digital diet. The technology has overwhelmed our daily lives to the point of absolute distraction. I mean, we're looking at the blinking red light on the BlackBerry, and people are texting while they're driving, and you know, people tweet the most, my personal observation, insane, irrelevant things about their life. And, you know, every time somebody asks you a question, you want to run to Google and look up the answer. That type of thing is what he's talking about. How to do that and get a little more, get away from some of that and get a little more balance in your life. Unless, of course, you're low on the totem pole and you have to answer all the boss's immediate emails on your BlackBerry, maybe. But he's saying he wants to teach people how to learn how to discard what doesn't work and keep what's truly useful for you. Right? There's a lot of people I know that could use something like this, although whether they just read it would be another one. And then a title, I just love the title of this book, Don't Kill the Birthday Girl. It's nonfiction, and it's a story of Sandra Beasley, the author, who has had severe allergies to certain foods her entire life. And although the title is, I think, is humorous, it is a very serious subject. I mean, when butter is deadly, if you eat something with eggs, it can make your throat swell shut. I mean, you've got to be very, very careful as you go through life. And basically where the title comes from is when guests came to celebrations which involved food at her home, something like even having eaten a piece of birthday cake, having a bit of frosting on your lips, and giving the birthday girl a kiss could set her off. She was that allergic to something. So the expression used to be, don't kill the birthday girl. In other words, be aware of what you're doing around her. So she's done the book, and basically it's a memoir that combines a cultural history and a sociological study of food allergies. And she talks about a lot, some of the heartbreaking experiences that happened in her life because of them, as well as things like dates that ended with trips to the emergency room, etc. and so forth. It's there's some fun to the book, but there's also a very serious side effect. I mean, I think we all now know, because there seems to be more of it than ever before, people who have very, very serious allergies. I know when I grew up, I'd never heard of an EpiPen or an allergy to peanut butter or anything like that. And now, it's almost hard to go through a week that we don't hear that somebody has come down with something like that. Now, I have a couple of titles, unfortunately, which aren't on my sheet. They came through at the last minute, and I'm just going to very quickly mention a couple of them to you, and then we'll be done. One is called No Regrets. It is the life of Edith Piaf. There are a lot of other books, but the author is claiming to have drawn on a lot of new sources. Basically, he's going to illustrate how, with her art and everything she went through in her life, why she is such an enduring symbol of France and why she's provided such inspiration for entertainers around the world. I mean, there was recently an album by, I think, Martha Wainwright, where she did Edith Piaf songs. Even to this day, she's still in. There's a book coming from Random House, a hardcover called Absolute Monarchs, and it's a really, really thorough history of the papacy by John Julius Norwich. And he is a renowned historian in the UK, so it would be a very thoroughly researched book. There may be some extra interest in something like this because there is an upcoming mini-series on TV on the Borgias, and of course their connection with the papacy, so that's one. And I've got one other last little one, a quirky little book. If you're into music, you may know Steve Earle. He's gotten into writing, and he's writing fiction. Now, he does a lot of touring. I don't know so much about Northern Ontario, but he does a lot of touring in the summer in southwestern Ontario, a lot of the music festivals. So he'll probably end up on CBC, etc., and so forth, or Stuart McLean or somebody will interview him or have him on, and that will give a little more publicity to his book. It's called I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive. And it's a fiction, a mystery. And I mentioned that. And that, whoa, I did talk fast. Pretty well ends the main ones I went through. I could have added more. Darn.
Excuse me, who was the author of the last book?
The last one? Steve Earle. I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive?
Yes.
Yeah, Earle, E-A-R-L-E.
Thank you.
I think it may be book 2, but it's his second book that he's done. He's known for his music and his songwriting. And I guess if he can write songs, he's tried his hand at novels.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Are there any questions or about titles?
Or if you have any general questions about publishing or stuff like that, I've spent a lot of years in that business. So now's your chance to ask, like, what is the secret behind announced print runs?
What kind of criteria do you use when you're deciding these titles to suggest?
Basically, I rely on the reps themselves.
Okay.
Only because when I was in publishing, yeah, you did a lot of reading, you got a lot of advanced manuscripts, and you got a feel for the book. You might only read a chapter, you might read the whole thing, you might have an unedited version. Now that I'm working for a library service center, and I'm really, in a sense, selling services for libraries, I don't do as much and have as much time for reading. Excuse me, so I rely on the reps to tell me, because really my job is not so much selling specific material as it is selling services. they're the best source. I mean, I know some of them that it's nothing for them to read a few hundred books a year, or at least most of them. I mean, if it's not doing anything for them, they'll drop it. And so when you add 8 or 9 or 10 of those together, that's a lot of books they cover. And as I say, they get them in advance. So they don't have to wait for it to come out. As do a lot of the review journals. That's why sometimes you'll see a book is coming in April, and yet I'll say, oh, well, you know, the New York Times reviewed it. They get manuscripts in advance, too. As do all the journals.
Thank you.
The other thing to watch out for, I made a reference to it, it's just one of my pet peeves, is announced print run. In Canada, they are fairly accurate, I've found, with most of the publishers, but in the U.S., a lot of games are played with announced first print run. I worked for a company for a while that they would announce 100,000 copy first print run on some new novel because they thought the author was wonderful. And then if the advance orders were only like 25,000, that's really all they printed. What they are trying to indicate to people with a large announced print run is that we really want to get behind this book, we really think it can do well. But it doesn't always happen that the print run is that big. So you have to take them with a grain of salt. As I say, in Canada, they're a little more realistic. Plus, if it's a book published just for Canada, 10,000 is a big print run for an adult book. The children's book is huge. Anything else? Sorry I didn't take longer, but...
Actually, I just wanted to say that you mentioned a lot of titles that I have personally found very interesting and would like to read.
Yeah, well, that's good. I've got a few of them, as I say, that I put in my requests for.
Mm-hmm.
Although, the other day I was playing with a Kobo, an e-reader, and when I mentioned on a Luddite, I sure am, because I just looked at that and why would anyone read a book on one of these? But anyway, so I like to get the actual book in my hand. Do we have any
becoming very popular.
e-readers out there?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, it's good. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I can certainly see going on vacation where you could take 10 or 15 or 20 books because you're not sure which ones you want to read, but I just, looking at this little screen and moving it on each, sorry.
The thing is, the kids, that's how they all read.
I think that's very true. I mean, I have a pet theory that, you know, the kind of work I did selling books for many years is not going to be a job that's around in 10 or 15 years. But that's just my personal feeling. But I won't have to worry about that. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. And I want to thank Marietta and West North for setting this up. It was a lot of fun. As I say, I haven't had a chance to present specific books for quite a while. So it was kind of fun to sit down with the reps and go through some things and look over them, and I appreciate your taking the time to listen, assuming you didn't nod off. I didn't hear anyone snoring, so that was a good sign. And maybe someday I'll get to meet some of you in person, I hope.
And OLS North thanks you very much for taking the time out to present our Adult Readers Advisory this morning.